Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's event, which is titled The Journey of a Medicine and Interactions with the HPRA. My name is Rebecca Cramp, and I am the Scientific and Reg Affairs Manager at the IPHA, and I'm the moderator. And I'm joined by my colleague, who's our Commercial Executive, who is Emer. Our speaker today is Dr. Una Moore, who joined the HPRA in 1999 as a Senior Immunological Assessor in the Veterinary Sciences Department and has since worked within Human Medicines, leading the CMC Biological Assessment Unit until moving to her current role as Pharmaceutical Assessment Manager. In this role, Una is responsible for leading the CMC review of applications across national, MRDCP, and centralized platforms. In today's talk, Una will outline some of the resources that are available in the journey of a medicine from the clinical trial stage to that period beyond authorization. And further, from a practical perspective, she will advise on the common errors to avoid in interacting with the HPRA today. So please do mute if you have not already done so. We'll take questions after the approximately 20-minute presentation, and then we'll have about 30 to 40 minutes for questions. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Moore, who will take the presentation. Thank you.
Hi, Una, you're actually on mute there.
Sorry, apologies. Apologies, Rebecca. So I was just going to say thank you, Rebecca, for the nice introduction, and also thank you to yourself and to Emer for inviting me to speak today on the journey of a medicine and the interactions with the HPRA. So on this slide, I have presented at a very high level some of the many stops on the medicine's journey where the HPRA gets involved. Now, if I was to cover all of these points, I could talk for hours, and as this presentation is only approximately 25 minutes, I decided to focus on areas that I thought would be of specific interest to the IPHA members. So today I'm going to be speaking about clinical trials, national scientific advice, and some of the ways in which we intervene to minimize interruptions to the marketplace for supply of medicines. After that, then I'll just talk about give you some tips for interacting with HPRA in order to minimize some common errors. So as I said there, I'm going to focus on clinical trials. And I suppose I picked this topic in light of all the proposed changes coming down the tracks in the coming months. So as we all know, clinical trials for medicinal products must be approved by the HPRA before a clinical trial can commence in Ireland. And the legal framework for this is the European Communities Regulations 2004, SI number 190 of 2004. That is the national legislation that allows us to approve these clinical trials. And this is actually the national transposition of the Directive 2001/20. So there is a vast amount of guidance on the HPRA website on how to submit a clinical trial application and also how to navigate a clinical trial through its life cycle. And I've included the link here. So if you access that link afterwards when you receive the presentation, the copy of the presentation, you'll be able to get that access to that information. So I suppose even though the new regulation is going to be implemented shortly, we are currently still working under the framework of SI 190. So at this point in time, all clinical trials must be submitted under SI 190. But as well, for information, people can also continue to use this framework until 31st of January 2023. Ongoing clinical trials, they also continue to operate under the SI Regulation 190, and they can continue to do so until 31st of January 2025. However, with the implementation of the new clinical trial regulation, on the 31st of January in 2020, another submission route would be available to sponsors, and we can talk about that in a few moments. And then as this presentation predominantly focuses with, say, the regulation itself, I just want to outline at the outset that the technical assessment requirements are really unaffected by the CTR, other than the labelling, which will now be assessed as part of the submissions. Under SI 190, labelling needs to comply with Annex 13 of the EU guide, and this then labelling then will then inspected by inspectors when they are out doing their inspections. However, these are now going to be assessed as part of the submission under the regulation. So then just moving on to the regulation itself. So what was the aim behind introducing the regulation? So this aim really was to create a favourable environment for conducting clinical trials in the EU, whilst ensuring highest standards of safety for participants, because we do know that there were issues with the conduct of clinical trials under the directive. And it was also to increase transparency of clinical trial information. So, for example, details about the authorization, the conduct of different clinical trials in the EU, and also the results of these clinical trials taking place in the EU will now be more publicly available than heretofore. So in this graphic, I have outlined just some of the timelines behind the CTR. So in April 2014, the clinical trial regulation was adopted. However, before the clinical trial regulation could be implemented, a single entry point, or a portal as it's called, for submitting clinical trial information needed to be developed, and this work was to be completed by the EMA. And this portal is referred to as the CTIS, which is the Clinical Trial Information System. So it took from April 2014 to April 2021 for the EMA to actually sort out this portal. And in April 2021, they confirmed that it was operational and had achieved full functionality. And then the European Commission confirmed this on the 31st of July 2021. And then from 6 months from the go live date of CTIS, the implementation of the regulation was taking place. So that brings us then to 31st of January 2022. So therefore, in summary, some of the key timelines. From January 2022 to 31st of January 2023, new clinical trial applications can be submitted under SI 190, or they can be submitted under the clinical trial regulation. However, from 31st of January 2023 onwards, new clinical trial applications must be submitted under the clinical trial regulation. Regarding ongoing clinical trials previously approved under SI 190, they can remain under this framework until the 31st of January 2025, but at that point they must transition to the new regulation. And then just for information, if you have a clinical trial that's continuing but ends before 31st of January 2025, there is no need to transition that trial. That trial has completed under the old legal framework. So, and then from 31st of January 2025 onwards, all ongoing clinical trials will have transitioned to the CT regulation. So in this slide, I've just highlighted some key features that were introduced by the clinical trial regulation to create a favourable framework for conducting clinical trials in the EU. So one of the main points is a single submission and approval process for multinational clinical trials submitted through CTIS. So, and this will be a big move forward, and it's similar to what currently exists for VHP, but the VHP procedure wasn't necessarily applied to all trials. So it also introduces a harmonised procedure for technical assessments on member states, and it adheres to strictly defined timelines. So the assessment of these clinical trials will be led by a reporting member state, also referred to as the OMS, and other member states who are involved in the clinical trial application will be referred to as member states concerned, CMS for short. And the aim behind this is to minimise divergent opinions across member states, and also to prevent national versions of the same protocol. And this is something that we did see happening when national competent authorities would require slightly different things in the protocol, then the protocol would diverge between member states. It also hopes to minimise on queries, because all queries will be sent through the procedure at the same time, and the reporting member state will then lead that discussion through to the conclusion of the procedure. Another very important factor was that they have now, when the application is submitted, the HPRA in this case and the National Ethics Committee will actually review the application at the same time. And this refers to the part 1 of the submission. So, and at the end of that part 1 submission, you will have a single national decision on the acceptability of the clinical trial. So this will cover the scientific and ethical aspects, and this will be issued within a mandated timeline. So, however, it's important to note that even though these clinical trials are going through a centralised procedure with a reporting member state responsible for leading the assessment, the final decision on the application itself will remain national. So, once again, going back to the point, creating a favourable environment for conducting clinical trials, there will be increased transparency as all details of the clinical trials conducted within the EU are to be made publicly available. And then furthermore, a single fee per member state will be introduced. So the HPRA and NREC will apply one fee and will require one fee, and that will be then sorted out between the HPRA and NREC as to how the fee is distributed. I suppose an important point to note as well is that in preparation for the CTR, the VHP process closes to submissions on the 15th of October, and that is tomorrow. So if in the meantime applicants need to submit a substantial amendment to a clinical trial, and the clinical trial was coordinated previously through the VHP procedure, then these clinical trial submissions will need to be assessed nationally. And just a word of caution, if this approach is being taken, this may cause issues with continued harmonisation of the clinical trial documents, because once again, national member states may take slightly different approaches. So as you can, due to substantial changes that are being introduced with the CTR, the HPRA has put a lot of effort into being prepared for this. So in this slide, I just outlined some of the things that we have been working on. So we have worked closely with the Department of Health and NREC to ensure that to establish the national legislation and the internal processes that will be required in order for the HPRA and NREC to work together. It will be required to issue a national decision, and also just to deal with all the other issues associated with the regulation that require national legislation. We've also been very involved in the working groups that have taken place in the EU, because interpretation of some of the regulation had to be done on an EU-wide basis so that everybody was working to the same understanding, and we have been very involved in that. The HPRA, in conjunction with NREC, also established a clinical trial national collaboration project. And this, I think, became operational in May. And the purpose of this was to mimic the joint assessment of the HPRA and NREC, so that we would be able to get some experience in assessing these applications before they were submitted through the clinical trial regulation. That national collaboration product is still in operation, and we have so people can still use it if they wish to use it before the end of the year. There are two submission dates available. They're the 19th of October and the 16th of November. And as I say, this is available until the end of the year. If you do wish to get involved in this, then contact HPRA using the clinical trials at hpra.ie email address, or else go directly to the NREC and contact them. So there are 2 slots available, so people can still get involved. And I suppose just to give you an update, we have received 4 applications to date using the National Collaboration Project. 2 of these have been approved and 2 of them are currently under assessment. We've also established a dedicated page on the HPRA website, and that's under the clinical trial section. And on that page, we provided links to a number of key presentations which deal with the wide range of topics associated with the clinical trial regulation. We published numerous HPRA newsletter articles, and also we have developed a new fee structure, which was released for public consultation. That public consultation closed on the 8th of October, and that fee structure was the new fee structure that would encompass the fees for both the HPRA and for NREC. So just continuing on then to other issues that we were involved in. So, and I suppose this is of very much importance at the moment. The HPRA is transitioning, is hosting a webinar week starting on Monday, the 22nd of November. It's entitled The New CTR Explained, and it's break time sessions to ease your transition. This is a joint HPRA NREC initiative. These sessions will take place for an hour between the time of 11 to 12. As I say, they start on Monday 22nd, they complete on Thursday the 25th of November, and they will look at the practical application of a clinical trial, the roles of the reporting member state, the concerned member states. They look at the interaction, how CTIS works, Ireland's approach with to working with the NREC, and also some safety reporting and the compliance aspects. So these hopefully will be very helpful to all our stakeholders. So it is probably recommended. It is recommended that you would sign up to these and participate. And the registration will open up in late October, early November. And once again, check the HPRA website for the initial registration date. And I've attached the link here to the slides so that you can access that information. So then moving on then to the sponsors preparedness and what you need to do in order to be prepared for the introduction of clinical trial regulation. So firstly, if you're interested in getting involved in the collaboration project, then you should inform the HPRA. Then you should also plan and prepare of how you're going to manage your clinical trials under the CTR. So in order to do this, you should identify what trials you plan to transition to the CTR and when you wish to transition them. You must ensure that there are no submissions to life cycle of these clinical trials outstanding, as you can only transition to under the clinical trial regulation if all the assessments are closed. Another important point to note is that the protocol for multinational trials must be harmonised prior to transition. So therefore, if you had national versions of your protocol, then you're going to you may require substantial amendments in the different member states in order to align that clinical trial protocol. And I suppose just to note that as the VHP procedure is coming to a conclusion, you want to be really careful that you don't disharmonise your clinical trials before you actually get them under the CTR. You also have to ensure that you have an EMA account in order to access CTIS. CTIS also interacts with other EMA databases, so you must ensure that the information in these other databases are up to date. And you have to do all of that before you can submit a clinical trial under the CTR. And then I suppose finally, you need to register for the HPRA webinar, review the available training and information documents on the HPRA website, and familiarise yourself with the requirements of the clinical trial regulation. So that's all I'm going to say now on the clinical trial regulation. So I'm just going to move then to the national scientific advice. So national scientific advice. So the HPRA considers the support we give to companies in relation to the development plans to introduce medicines to Ireland is an important aspect of our role. And indeed, we are very active in the provision of EU scientific advice through the EU network. Annually, we complete approximately 100 scientific advices per year. However, what I want to highlight here is not our role at the EU level. It's more in relation to our own national scientific advice, stroke regulatory scientific advice, because this fulfills a different role, I believe, than the EU scientific advice, and that is because we give advice during this procedure that can be applied to national regulatory issues. So, for example, if you're preparing your dossier for submission to the HPRA as RMS, and it's an area that we're growing quite substantially over the last number of years, then you can talk to us about the quality of the dossier submission. You could talk to us about the legal basis. Other examples of which you could speak to us about, for example, would be if you have proposed to switch an applicant to do a methylene supply switch, then you could ask for scientific advice on how you go about doing that and what type of information you need to supply to us. We've also received some national scientific advice queries on applications on, say, proposed product labelling changes for a range of products, and we can give advice as to how that should be conducted. And also we've received requests for advice for companies to participate in variation work sharing procedures. So we do fill a gap that probably isn't filled by the EU scientific advice procedure. However, I'd also like to say to you as well that we do give over 100, we do get involved in at least 100 applications of EU scientific advice. So we can give you scientific advice at the same level as you would receive at the EU under the EU MA procedure. But we also do give some more local advice. Regarding scientific advice applications, you can submit them to request advice for any stage of development of your product. You can submit it in the quality area, the clinical or non-clinical area. And what you could also do is you could submit your advice to us in advance of submitting it to the EU. So that maybe we can give you some more direction so that when you do go to submit your EU scientific advice request, you actually have the questions and you have some more information behind you. The procedure itself is a 60-day procedure, and it is a very interactive procedure as the HPRA will generally meet with the applicants if an applicant requests a meeting. These are obviously online at the moment, but we are quite open to meeting with the applicant to discuss the advice. And these meetings generally take about 90 minutes. And then within 30 minutes of the meeting, or 30 days of the meeting, the HPRA will issue their formal advice. So once again, I've given the email address or the link to the National Scientific Advice Procedure on the HPRA website in case people wish to access it. So then just points to note when you are submitting national scientific advice, always book a slot in advance. We do recommend that you approach us at least 2 months in advance. However, these slots do get booked up and we only accept 12 applications per year. So if you are planning on booking a slot, come to us as soon as you can so that we can book you in. When you're submitting your scientific advice questions, avoid open questions. Be very clear to us what you're asking, because the clearer the question, then the clearer the answer you're going to get. If we have to interpret the question, then we may not be answering the question that you think that you've asked. Also provide a clear company position and be open with the information, because once again, the more information you provide to us, the more informed the response we can make back to you. Also request the advice before studies are complete. Once your studies are complete, then it's too late for us to be of any real benefit. The studies are done. Also, we don't conduct pre-assessments of already completed data during the scientific advice procedure. That's done at the MA application stage. But we will discuss the completeness of the data that you provided, and we will highlight deficiencies to you. So if we find that you are proposing to support an application with a particular study, we will tell you then whether we think it is sufficiently complete or not. We don't assess study reports as part of scientific advice. And I suppose the other important thing to remember is that scientific advice is not legally binding. It's not legally binding to you, or it's not legally binding to us. However, if you have requested scientific advice from us or from any other member state or through the EU procedure and you don't intend to use it, then at the time of marketing authorization application, you really would want to explain why you have decided not to accept scientific advice that was issued. And then if you are interested in getting involved in the National Scientific Advice Procedure, then contact us by email at the scientificadvice@hpra.ie. Okay, so now just moving on to the other point that I mentioned that we would talk about, and that is really what we do in order to help maintain medicines on the Irish market. Because as you know, one of our remits is to ensure medicine availability. But we're also very aware that unexpected issues do arise. And when these unexpected issues do arise, then we want to be there to help the MAH overcome these and maintain supply. So this is one of the reasons that batch specific request procedure was introduced many, many years ago, because it is a mechanism to allow the temporary supply of an authorised product when the authorised product is unavailable, or it's in short supply, or the product is not in full compliance with its PA. So, as I said previously, they are approved to ensure continued supply of the medicine. And in order to ensure this continued supply of the medicine, we can permit supply of a medicine from another jurisdiction. And I suppose this is very pertinent in light of Brexit, because a lot of the products that we would have had before come from the UK market. So, and we still realise the importance of the UK products to supply our market in the event of a shortage. So we have to try and deal with that situation as best we can. And we've actually updated the BSRS form that's on the HPRA website to request that information, as in indicate if this product is coming from an EU member state, Northern Ireland, or the EEA, or from outside the EU. The other reasons why we approve BSRs is to ensure to bring the product into compliance with its registration. And an example of what we've seen of late is, once again, in relation to Brexit, where, say, for example, an MAH would have a product information that would have reference to either the old MAH address or name, or they may have reference to an old site of batch release. So, and the dossier has been amended to, for example, register the new site of batch release, but their packaging and the labeling haven't caught up. So what we would do there is we would temporarily align the authorization with the package leaflet for that particular batch. And of course, it's always very important to remember that when we make these decisions, they are case by case, and every single product will have to be studied in its own right, and the risk of supplying the product with non-compliance for which the batch-specific request has been submitted for will have to be taken into consideration. And we will only approve that batch-specific request if the risk of supplying it in the manner which has been proposed is acceptable. And again, I've given the relevant details, links there for submission. So points to note then regarding the BSRs, they can only be approved for products which hold a PA in Ireland or are centrally authorised. If you don't have a PA for a product in Ireland, then we can't approve a batch-specific request. We have begun to approve batch-specific requests for centrally authorised products in the last few number of years. And this is only if the product is critical to supply to the Irish market. This is a little bit more tricky for the HPRA because we didn't issue the authorization to start with. When we issue the authorization, it's easier for us to vary it. However, so most of the batch-specific requests that we have accepted for the clinically authorized products would really be in relation to product information deviations. And for example, if we had a product that had a common label that was available in the UK, and the only information that was missing from the label was the PV name and address of the HPRA, then we could approve the marketing of that product by way of a BSR. The other, sorry, I don't know why this is happening. Batches, batch-specific requests can also only be approved for batches already QP released. If these batches are not QP released, then it is up to the qualified person to deal with the deviation in line with Article 3 of Annex 16. So they have to be QP released in order for a batch-specific request to be approved. And another important point is that when we approve a batch-specific request, it's only approved to place the product on the Irish market. We have had a number of queries coming in from MAHs asking, if we approve a batch-specific request, does that apply then to other member states? And the answer is no, it only applies to the Irish market. Another point to note is that if there is going to be a potential shortage of a product, then the MAH must inform shortages. That's really important. So that we ourselves within the HPRA know what the situation is regarding medicine availability. Even though we do issue a batch-specific request and approve one, the QP remains responsible for all the batches released to the market, and this is as per Article 51 of Directive 2001/83. And then an issue that is arising now with importation of product from the UK is if the product is imported from a third country, the site of physical import must hold manufacturing authorization for this activity. Now, we have actually been able to get around some of the problems with sites not having an MIA for import from a third country, and that is because we have been using the EU Commission notice on the exemptions for small markets. So we have been giving companies exemptions to import under a WDA. So we don't know what's going to happen with these exemptions. I believe there's going to be some type of announcement made fairly soon. So hopefully that facility will remain with us. But at the moment, it is supposed to expire at the end of this year. And then just for your information as well, priority assessment will be given to urgent BSRs between 24 and 48 hours. We hope to pick them up. If they're non-urgent BSRs, then we hope to pick them up within 5 days. So then just some of the practical difficulties that we encounter when we receive batch-specific requests. I suppose the most important one we consider is late submission of BSRs. So we get a request for a company to approve a BSR, but the product is already out of stock, or it will be within days. And if it's a complex BSR, this puts incredible amount of pressure on the HPRA staff, because these sometimes when the BSRs can be very complex, say for example, if they're coming in foreign labeling packs. So we do have to do a lot of research and work and discussion internally. And we find then that we're under pressure because we don't want the stock to come off the market. Another issue we find is that sometimes companies ask for excessive number of units in the BSO request, and they want to supply the product for longer than 3 months. Normally 3 months is the supply time that we give. And they ask for these, but they don't give any valid justification as to why they want longer than 3 months, or they want these large numbers of units proposed. So in this case, we have to go back and we have to ask for an explanation. If you give that justification up front, then we can look at it and we can decide whether or not it's justified and get back to you to confirm yes or no. Also, we find that the letter of consent is not submitted when the applicant is not the MAH. So if you are submitting it, you're not the MAH, you do need a letter of consent. Also, we find the applicant must be contactable at least within office hours, and a direct line number should be provided. Many times on a Friday evening, we are trying to contact the applicant to ask for, an outstanding piece of information so that we can make a decision as to whether we can approve the BSO or not, and we just can't make contact. So if you're submitting a batch-specific request late in the evening and it's urgent or on a Friday, then please do have a direct line number and do be available if we need to contact you. Regarding BSRs that involve label and leaflet changes, they must be accompanied by the copies of the approved and the proposed full product information with all the differences highlighted, so that we can see what the differences are, rather than us having to go through and compare them ourselves. Another important point is that if you have been in contact with the HPRA previously about the BSR, do include that previous correspondence, because decisions are made on a case-by-case basis. And if you've had discussions beforehand, that information will be very valuable to the assessor who is making that decision, because they may be unaware that discussions have taken place. And then also, when you're submitting your BSR, clearly outline the proposed wording of the caution and use letter that you will need to use. And that just means then that we don't have to go back and ask you for that letter, and it just reduces one communication step. So then that completes on the BSR. So now I just want to go through some of the general tips when interacting with the HPRA. So the first one is, I suppose, the most important aim for all companies when they submit applications to the HPRA is to minimize our HPRA company interaction. The less interaction we have, the more queries that we're going to raise, and the quicker the procedure will be completed. So just to start with the administrative details, always reference previous correspondence with the HPRA. So that's really important. And if you have a case number, please also reference it. So it just means that when the assessor then goes to look at the case and look at the application submission, they can read the background information beforehand. These 2 points really are together: timely submission of national SPC and product information text once the procedure has concluded, or else the timely submission to request for additional information. So the reason we ask for these timely submissions is, one, sometimes there could be a cascade effect. We can't approve one case until a previous case is approved, so there could be delays caused there by not replying to further information requests from a previous case. Also as well, in situations where we have complex assessments underway, if we have requested additional information, well, we work to a timetable and we work to a plan. We have planned that we will assess your responses at a certain time. If they don't come in, some other application fills that slot, and then it takes time for the assessor to go back to your application. So you may be a couple of weeks late submitting your application, but then it will take us a further number of weeks to pick that up, because the times that we had allocated for that has now passed. Regarding marketing status applications, please ensure the HPRA is notified of any changes to marketing status. And that is really important, because when we're looking at potential shortages and we're approving BSRs, we will always go and look to see what other products are on the market. And if you have a product that we think is marketed, that may impact on the decision that we make on the BSR. So regarding technical regulatory advice, always check available guidelines before requesting information from the HPRA. We get a huge amount of queries. So if you can sort some of these issues out yourself beforehand, that would help us and would give us more time to do our assessments. Regarding adherence to guidelines, this is not mandatory, but we would expect that you would adhere to guidelines. So therefore, if you are deviating, you must explain why you are deviating, and give a scientific justification. And it could just be based on experience you've had from previous registrations. So if you're not adhering to guidelines, please explain to us why you're not adhering to them, and then we can decide if that's valid justification or not. Development and the control of the manufacturing strategy. This is obviously a key area that we focus on during assessments. So we would ask that you coherently outline how the manufacturing process is controlled. And in addition to this, also focus on how, if the process goes out of control, that you will identify this. And that will be very valuable information for the assessor. When submitting data and laboratory or validation reports, don't just submit them to us, but describe the context and the reason why you are submitting these reports, and what the point you're trying to make with this supportive information. Because sometimes we do receive laboratory validation reports and we don't really know what the context for the submission of this information is, and we have to go back and try and work it out. And it's always important to consider who these documents are being prepared for. Assessors deal with so many products and so many applicants that we jump from one product to another, so we don't have the same level of information about your product as you have. So you need to present your response in a clear manner to allow the issue to be picked up and resolved efficiently by the assessor. And then this is my last slide. Sometimes we find that once we ask for additional information, we find that the response we get doesn't fully answer the question. And that could be down to how we phrase the question, but it could also be down to the person who's responding to the question not giving it full consideration or not being clear what's being asked. So if we raise a question and you're not sure what the point of the question is, please do contact HPRA, because that will be then passed on to the assessor, who can then give you further information. Another issue, which is a big bone in contention for assessors, is that an issue has been identified in earlier submission. Then we find that subsequent submissions come in and the issues that have been resolved in the earlier submission have not been taken on board. Now, because this is a standard and because these applications stand alone, we then have to go back out and we have to ask you then for the same justification as we asked you previously, and that just delays the processing of the application and just takes up assessors' time. Another point is that if you don't automatically agree with all our recommendations. So we will give you a recommendation or we will suggest something, but if you actually don't agree with it, that's fine. But you need to come back and say to us and explain to us why you don't agree. And then we will reevaluate and we'll take that information into consideration, and then we revert back to you on our conclusion. And then another issue for specific clinical trials specifically is that we routinely see comments such as the specifications are appropriate for this phase of development. We don't get any further justification, and because that doesn't suit our needs, we will have to go back and we will have to ask for further justification. Generally, the justification can be broad enough and we can accept it, but we can't accept it without any justification. So just to say thank you, that concludes my presentation. Thank you, Emer. I think I went over 20-25 minutes, so apologies for that.
That's absolutely no problem at all, Una. Thanks a million. Unfortunately, Rebecca has had some technical difficulties, so she dropped off the call there, but hopefully she'll be able to get herself back on. So look, just very quickly, thank you. That was absolutely fantastic, Una. It was a great presentation. A lot of practical advice there that I'm sure the companies here will appreciate. I think the clear thing really is that, to outline everything as clearly as possible to you in the HPRA, reference numbers, everything, just to assist you and to make your job more efficient as well. So I really do encourage people here on the call, if you have any specific questions, to either raise your hand or put them in the chat box. I think questions just after popping in here. But look, we have 20 minutes here and Una's more than happy to answer whatever questions you have. I do want to say that the recording will be available, and Una, the slides will be available as well, because I think you referenced some email addresses in the slides, so they will be available to share. So I'm just going to go to one of the questions here from Kira Mulderg. Can you clarify if HPRA want to be notified of marketing status of centrally authorised products if a product ceases to be marketed in Ireland, in addition to notification going to the EMA?
Okay, we have had long discussions about that in the HPRA, and our conclusion, and we have decided that we don't need to know.
Don't need to know.
Okay. We don't need to know. It's just we couldn't manage it. It'd be too difficult for us to manage. So that's fine.
Perfect. That is great. Sorry, Rebecca is just texting me here. Sorry, another question that's come in. Does the HPRA expect to increase the level of inspections next year to catch up on the inspections missed during COVID?
Unfortunately, I don't work in the compliance section, so I don't know. But I can certainly find out for you if that's something that you would like us to do.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Una. And I know that when we were speaking earlier, if there is any questions, specific questions that may not be in Una's field, but if you think, but that you'd like to ask, please let us know. And Una had kindly said that she will pass them on to her colleagues. Another question here from Sean Corbett. Regarding caution in use letters from BSR, had an instance where after drafting a proposed CIU letter, he was informed that there was a template with standardized wording preferred. Would it be possible to have access to such templates before submitting applications?
Yes, I think, and I've actually said that if you want the BSR template, it can be available upon request.
Okay, that is perfect. Now, does anybody have any verbal questions that they would like to ask Una there? You can raise your hands, please. Sorry there, I think that there's one coming in here. Is there anything further you want to add there, Una, or?
Sorry, I didn't, what was the question?
Sorry, no, I'm just wondering, oh, sorry, we have another one linked to the question above, but a PT query. Are the HPRA notified of imported packs, even if centrally authorised, and can the MA holder request these packs?
Sorry, can you repeat that question? I was just thinking it might be a distribution question.
Yeah, no problem. So it's linked to the question above, but it's a PT query. Are the HPRA notified of imported packs, even if centrally authorised, and can the MA holder request these packs?
That's a distribution question. I'd have to go back to compliance again and ask that question. I'm not sure what PT means also.
Maybe Finn Lines, that's your question. Do you want to even come off if you want to ask the question and maybe explain what PT is?
Oh, parallel trade. Okay. From my understanding of parallel trade and my understanding of this question, what we would do is we approve the parallel trade authorization application, and then we would tell, excuse me, we would tell the parallel trader to go and inform the originator that they were parallel trading their product. Regarding the notifications, once again, I'm not too sure. That is more a distribution and compliance question. So I can try and get that information as well if that question is submitted to us.
Perfect. So Finn, if you'd like to even email me and I can get that passed on to Una, who can give it to her colleagues. Thank you for that. Now, is there any other further questions there? Again, if anybody wants to raise their hand, or if there's anybody in the IPHA team who'd like to raise anything with Una, you can come off mic and ask the question. I think everybody's been quite shy here this morning, Una. We have another one. Regarding scientific advice, do the HPRA give scientific advice for centralised products where the RAP or co-RAP has already been assigned, or is EU scientific advice the only option in this case?
Okay, so that's a very specific question. So we would give scientific advice on products that are going down a centralised route. So that's no problem. When you say the RAP or co-RAP has been assigned, my understanding of an assignment of a RAP or co-RAP means that the decision has been made to give that application to a particular country. So, for example, if Ireland has bid for a centralised application and we've been successful in our bid, we are now RAP. But that would take place, say, between 3 and 6 or even longer, sometimes months before the submission. So if the country has been assigned, I don't see why we wouldn't, but I don't know if that has happened. So I'd have to go back and ask again if that has happened.
Okay, perfect. Perhaps if he, I think it was Kim that asked that question there, if she even wants you to follow up further, if there's any supplementary question to that, okay, maybe to let me know and we can get that across. Oh, she's saying that's okay. That's all good.
I know it's only a half answer, but it really depends on what stage, if the discussions have taken place with the RAP and co-RAP already, and it is moving to imminent stages of submission, then the approach, we'd have to be careful in the approach we take, because you should really be going to the RAP and co-RAP then, because you will be having meetings with them. If you're talking about months in advance, that might be a different situation. So I suppose we would probably look at that on a case-by-case basis, to be honest. We just have to be a little bit careful.
Okay, fantastic. Any more questions there? We can give people back time on the day if they wish, but please feel free to ask any questions there. No, there's nobody else coming in. Una, is there anything further that you would like to add at this point, or?
Not really, just to say thank you again. I hope it was helpful, the presentation. If you have you or any of your members have any queries, you can always send them to me by email. And also, I suppose, I have been asked to plug yet again the 4 webinar sessions that we are going to be doing in November on the clinical trial regulation. I know people will be looking for questions in advance. So if you have some questions on clinical trial regulation, then just think about them and maybe submit them to us, and we will be able to try and deal with them then during the webinar itself.
Perfect, that's fantastic. Look at Una, that was absolutely brilliant. We really appreciate it. I think that there was a lot of, I think somebody just said to me in a text there that there was things there that they didn't know that they should have known. And again, it's always really useful to have that practical advice behind how to interact with you guys. There's some lovely comments coming in here saying thanks a million, that was very helpful. And again, if you have any questions, please let me know. I will send on the recording. I will send on the slides. There may be some questions that might maybe arise when people look at the slides back themselves, and I can liaise back directly with you, Una, if that's okay. So I will give everybody 10 minutes of their day back. They can have an early lunch if everybody's hungry. And Una, once again, on behalf of IPHA, thank you very much. Rebecca sends her apologies for technical problems. So thank you very much. Take care.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.